Alright guys, I'm back I guess, sorry about that delay. First thing I wanted to mention is that if you wanted to get the navigation controls back that I gave you in the first two tutorials, you're going to have to go up here to File, User Preferences, and Emulate 3-button mouse, and that'll get them back to what I told you before. Okay, so other than that, I'm just going to jump right back in. I'm going to try to keep pace, so to do that, I'm just going to assume that everything I've told you in the previous videos you already know and remember. Okay, so the first feature I'm going to go over is kind of strange and I don't really use it, but it's a good precursor to the features I'm about to show you in a second. And that's the spin function, which is right over here. So you want to make sure to tab into edit mode. I'm just going to select this and go to top view. And I'll just show you how it works by default. So if you go over here, you click spin, I'll explain what happens. So down here you see the controls for it. And a thing to note is by default the center point is the 3D cursor right here, so you can see that it's spinning it around this 3D cursor, and the other thing is the default axis is parallel to your screen. So if you wanted to change the default values, you see here I can change the center point, and down here I can change the axis it's rotating on. So an example of how you could use this to get better control is, say I select this, do Shift S, cursor to selected. Now you see when I spin this, it'll go around the 3D cursor down here. And the rest of the controls are pretty self-explanatory. Here I change the degrees of the entire rotation and steps for subdivisions. Alright, so the first modifier I'm going to be showing you here is the array modifier. Then I'm going to show you the curve modifier, and then I'm going to show you how to combine them and the kind of stuff you can use that for. Something that I'm going to say once, and I'm not really going to go over, is that if you're getting funky results, you really have to watch the object centers when doing arrays and curves, because you're going to get some really messed up results if you're not paying attention to it. So that being said, try to pay attention to where I'm keeping my object centers to get the results that I'm getting. Okay, so we're going to go over here to the wrench and add a modifier and add an array, and immediately you see that the object's been duplicated one times its own length along the x-axis. That's because here it's checked under relative offset, which is always going to duplicate the object relative to its own size. So you see here, this is along the x-axis. If I zero that out and do it along the y-axis, it's been duplicated one times its own size. And this is always determined by the closest vertex to the direction it's being duplicated in. So you see here, if I move this vertex, since it's being duplicated relative to each other, it's going to be moving with it, as opposed to the constant offset. If I were to do 1 unit in the y direction, it doesn't matter the shape of the object, it's always one blender unit that it's being moved over. So then you see your options up here. Count is obviously going to determine the amount of times the object is being duplicated. You can choose between count. Fit length is if you want it to fit within certain parameters. You choose the length here in Blender units. And the last option you'll use usually when using the curve modifier as well, but here if I add a path, you see if I set this to NURBS path, the length of the array will be based on the length of this path. Okay, so here, if you turn off these two and add object offset, I'm going to add an empty. And you see it added at the 3D cursor there. Go back here under object offset, select the empty. And okay, the best way I can describe this is, as always, the object data, all this stuff here, is compared to this object center point. So if I move that up, it's always going to be compared to that center point. What this object offset does for the array is it compares this object center point to this object center point. So always compare this to this, and then this to this. So you see the empty I added here. If I rotate this, it's saying look at this center point, move it over here. Now look at this center point, rotate it. And it'll keep repeating that over and over until you can do things like this. If you were to try scaling it, you see what happens. One of the most obvious uses for this is something like a tire. If I go in here, you see I can set the diameter, and then if I select the empty, I could just rotate it and make a tire. A thing to note is that when you're done, if you go up here, just under the array modifier, make sure you check merge first and last. It will merge these vertices here with the adjacent ones on the array. And one last thing to note is that when you're using the object offset in the array, if you look at these individual objects, you see that there's no distortion whatsoever. These lines are all still completely straight, and the only reason I say that is you'll see that that's not the case when we use the curve modifier. So here's an example of what you can do with using the array modifier in conjunction with the curve modifier. You see here I have this simple pattern being arrayed along this curve. And what's cool is if you go in here and then edit the curve, I can go in and bend it. And here you see what I was talking about before. When I bend this, you see how there's an actual distortion in the mesh. In some cases like this is what you'll want. I want it to be folding on itself like that. But if I was doing something like a chain, for instance, I wouldn't want the individual links of my chain to be distorted or bending. So in that particular case, I would end up using dupliverts or dupliframes instead, which I'll be showing you later as well. Okay, so here I'm going to show you the curve modifier. Just go up here, add curve. I'm going to have to add, you can add any of these, but I'm going to put a path, and here I'm going to set the object to nerves path, and here you already see weird stuff is happening just because this object center is so off. So I'm just going to go here and zero it out really quick. If you go here, you can choose the deformation axis. That should be straightforward enough. If I move this, I can determine its movement along the curve. Go in here, I can change this, and you see it's starting to bend. But yeah, what makes this really cool is when it's used in conjunction with the array modifier. So if I go up here, I'm going to array first. Let's do a relative offset in the y direction of 1. And now let's add another curve. Apply to nerves path, and then you see if I go here, move it along the curve, you can start getting really cool results.